Welcome to Brilliant Business Insights. This show solves your greatest business, leadership, and professional development challenges. We realize there isn't one solution to every problem, so we bring you proven strategies, best practices, and expert insights to get you, your business, and your employees where you want to go by removing the BS, business stress.
And I just want to mention that we're live today.
Yes.
So BBI is live for the first time. So forgive us if we go astray. A little Prince there.
A little.
For all your Gen Zers who don't know who Prince is. Now, see, the downfall with being live is if we were being recorded, we could have totally put crickets in after that.
Yeah. Because they wouldn't have known
who Prince was. Yeah.
No. That's a shame.
Yeah.
Makes me want to cry, Purple Rain.
Well, thanks for joining us here today. We will be discussing the oftentimes overused and underutilized tool of assessments.
So today our topic is assessments, a cautionary tale.
Yes.
So then what, in your opinion, is important to touch on today?
With regard to assessments, because what I find is, especially with a lot of my clients, they think, oh, we're going to do this corporate-wide assessment, and then all our talent problems will be solved.
Gone.
We'll just have all the information we need to know about everybody, and we can predict everything, and we can train everybody, and everything will be no more problems from here on out.
Yes, and?
Crickets.
Crickets. And not just because they're Gen Zers.
Right. That's not what happens.
Right.
And so oftentimes I think as management, we look at that to be our solution to all of our talent problems, and it's not. Okay. And so when we talk about it, we're talking about it in the sense of, yes, there are benefits. Absolutely, there are benefits to assessments, and it's great insight, and you get invaluable information from it. Mm-hmm. But there's a downside to it. There's an overuse to it and an underuse to it. There are challenges that arise because of it. And so what we'll go into is the 3 segments of assessments. So there are shortfalls, mm-hmm. there are benefits,
good,
how they can be used brilliantly, and then how you can mitigate some of those pitfalls and mm-hmm. optimize some of those benefits. Because I think where we go short is we get the results, and then it kind of tapers off after that. We really don't utilize assessments to their full potential.
Gotcha.
So that's a little bit about what we'll be covering today.
Thank you. And a little bit about us. This is Lori Kuhn. I'm Jen Fredericks. We're with Thrive, a human development company. And check out our website if you'd like to know more about us. It's thrivehdc.com. And then we want to thank John Taylor, our video and production guru, who's with Milwaukee Video, and he can be contacted at mkevideo.com. And then joining us later is special guest Amy Curler, who is a Gallup-certified StrengthsFinder coach and a learning and development manager.
Yes, I'm excited.
I am too.
Yeah, I know. I met someone yesterday and we had a long conversation. One of her clients just did a corporate-wide assessment. It mm-hmm. wasn't StrengthsFinders, but so I got a lot of information on it. So I'm curious to see the StrengthsFinder, the take on StrengthsFinders.
Cool.
So what we want to jump into is, as people, we try to make sense of the world around us. And I think this is oftentimes why leaders bring in these assessments. I want to make sense of things. I want to understand people because let's face it, we're all individuals. We all operate differently. Different things make us tick. Mm-hmm. And so the more I can learn about you and what makes you come alive and what motivates you, that's invaluable information to me as a leader. And mm-hmm. so I want to know that. I want to get as close as I can to possible with having that deep understanding and awareness.
This reminds me a little bit of our very first episode when we talked about goals and the individualized approach and how leaders can get to deeply know their employees to help mm-hmm. them develop those goals. Well, assessments can be a great tool for that.
Right. And deeper in a sense that now I talk sports with you and I know who your favorite teams are.
Like, did you watch The Bachelorette when you're, standing around the water cooler?
Right. But I really want to know. And to a certain point, because there's a certain point in corporate America where we don't let people in. There's some things we don't want you to go there. Mm-hmm. But there is that level of intimacy where I know if I put you on a project that you're going to thrive, or I know which of your strengths are going to stand out and maybe which weaknesses you have that I can bring someone else in to help support you.
Gotcha.
And so I think strength finders and assessments in general are really good at doing some of those things.
Cool.
So the other component of assessments is self-awareness.
Right.
And so I think we often miss that when we're doing assessments. And so if we're just starting to kind of jump into some of the pitfalls of assessments, I'm taking you through this tool that's asking you a lot of generalized, generic questions. And now, if I'm an employee and I know that my position and my boss values these characteristics, I'm going to start answering a lot of those questions based on what I think my boss is going to want or what comes up in my review.
Right.
So if something continuously comes up in my review, well, yeah, I'm going to score really high there because that's what I need to score because that's what they expected me.
Yeah.
And so some of it is, how truthful are we being? How self-aware are you to realize that you can gain a lot of insight from this and this is invaluable if you're not fudging the results?
Oh, fudge.
Right. Oh, I don't want to seem like I'm not highly intelligent. Oh, I don't want to seem like I'm not detail oriented.
Right.
Because my job requires details, which is interesting. This conversation I was having with my client, she was saying there was this one person in particular who does a lot of detail work. And so one of the results came back that she wasn't detail oriented.
Okay.
And so she told her boss, because she wasn't detail oriented, and that's what this assessment pulled out, that she didn't want to do any of the details anymore. That wasn't her strength. That wasn't where they needed to utilize her, to optimize her talent. But yet every job contains a certain amount of detail. I mean, at some point you got to get into the detail. And she had been doing this detail work forever and was very successful at it and very good at it. But after this assessment, she decided that was something she didn't want to do, and they weren't fully utilizing her by making her do this. And so just to bring in that self-awareness piece, sometimes assessments don't work in your favor, and sometimes assessments can really hold people back. And I know you have some good examples of this.
I have some examples of this. So sitting here watching now, you might not think that I was not confident at some point in my life, or that I wasn't willing to share on the go or any of those things. So back in my corporate and agency days, I went through like the gauntlet of assessments, and I was hungry for them, because I've now, since I have stepped back and I'm doing more self-awareness work and I know myself a little bit more, that could also be, midlife coming in, but I was so hungry for it. I took everything they threw my way. I tried to digest it. I did MBTI, I did Enneagram, I did StrengthsFinder, and the one that really held me back the most was StrengthsFinder, because they didn't resonate with me. My top 5. There were a couple that I was like, oh yeah, I get that. But one was intellection. And, there's a deep explanation of what intellection is and how it's a strength and how you can use it, and maybe some things to look at so that you don't, misuse it or overuse, whatever. All I saw was intellect. And I didn't consider myself smart. Now, I graduated high school, I was in AP classes, I went to college, got a degree, did really well, but somewhere, and I'm not blaming it on my childhood either, because I had the most supportive household, but there was something in me that wasn't confident in my intelligence. I didn't think I was smart. And so this really created conflict within me to see that this is showing that I have intellection, which again, all I saw was the intellect part, as one of my top 5. In fact, my number 2. It was my number 2. And so I started to doubt myself even more, be like, well, this is saying that I have this strength of intellection and I don't see it. So I really delved into what I knew about myself, and that was the detail work. So whereas your client went away from the detail work, even though this intellection and input was my number one, can lead to more the strategy side. Heck no. I ran the other way. I went to execution and operations and didn't want to do a lot of the strategy work. And that was so like, I have a pile of my assessment work under the table here. I'll pull some of them out later. But every time someone says assessments, and especially after I started doing my self-awareness work and coaching certification with Thrive, it made me want to throw up in my mouth a little bit.
Oh.
Like all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and what I hear you saying in that is there was something that was pulled out in you as a strength, and it wasn't developed. So what that did for you is it actually scared you. So that's the other piece of assessments. Are assessments being done in such a way where it empowers and motivates the person, or is it scaring and disempowering the person? And it sounds like with you, it disempowered you. And so one of the things that I really want to address in here and how you can set yourself up for success when using these assessments is really making sure your employees have a solid foundation, building those essential skills first, because if they don't have an understanding, or like you, they didn't have the confidence to embrace the results, it actually impacted you negatively.
Yes.
And so those are some things that can be done beforehand. And I'm sure Amy will get into a lot of this, is there are some things that you can do before the assessment so that the employee can better handle some of the information and some of the results they receive.
Right.
And also look at it more from, let's not just know your strengths, but now if there are weaknesses that you have that have come to light, I want to know how to develop those within you. And I also want to know how to have you fully embrace some of those things that are strengths. So no one, and what I hear you saying is no one went back to you and said, you know what? You're very intelligent. Do you feel that? Do you embrace that? Is that what you want to lead with? Nobody went back to see how you wanted to operate within that.
Yeah. Well, and to be fair, that also was like a decade ago. And so I just want to say, like, I possibly don't remember that this has happened. But I do. I resonate with that. And then here's the other thing. I always held back in meetings. I didn't feel empowered or confident to speak up, especially during quick fire, like brainstorming ideation sessions. And to me, that reinforced the fact that I wasn't smart. When in fact, when you go a little deeper and read about intellection, it's one of the things to look out for.
Yeah.
Like, just let people know, oh, hey, when we're doing these quick fire brainstormings, my mind is firing and I need some time to process it and then come back to you.
Yeah.
But for some reason, I didn't pick that up in any of the coaching if we had gotten some about that strength.
Yeah. And that's where a great leader can come in, and a well-trained leader. In one of the examples, another one of my clients did the same thing, where there was this really brilliant individual. And after this assessment, he, part of his description and his label was he was an introvert. And so because of that, he felt less inclined. Now I don't have to contribute in these meetings because I'm an introvert and nobody expects me to participate. And so that flew under the radar for a while, and then his manager started noticing it. So before the meetings or after, she would approach him and say, look, this is what we're going to talk about. I really want your opinion on this. Or afterwards, I looked over at you and I could tell your wheels were turning. What were your thoughts when we were talking about this?
Right.
And then she would ask if she could share it in the next meeting or share it with others because it was such good information. And so she had the wherewithal to know that and to pull that out of the individual. But a lot of leaders don't get that training.
That's what I was just going to say. It sounds like there were opportunities for her to develop some of those leadership skills that a lot of times when you're promoted to be a leader, you're kind of thrown into the gauntlet and you aren't given the management skills or leadership skills that are going to help you develop your people.
Yeah. And what was interesting about this particular example is that after a while, he realized just how invaluable his insights were.
Yay!
And he got to the point where he started sharing on his own.
Good.
So where he was labeled the introvert and he hid behind it for a while, fortunately, he had the manager that was able to pull that out of him. And so that's what we're talking about when we're talking about these assessments. It's just having that little extra to know how to do these things.
So taking the next step.
Yes,
Taking
absolutely.
the next step with them.
Yep.
Awesome.
And so we've kind of gone into, some of the, the shortfalls to assessments, and we really want to get into some of the benefits of
Right. You don't want
assessments.
everyone to throw up in their mouth a little bit
Right,
when they hear that it's assessment time.
Or to run scared,
Right.
like, oh no, I'm taking this assessment, the results are going to come back that, I'm a green monster from the lagoon or something, and they're going to fire me.
I'm going to be out of here.
Right.
Or, like, how can you make them not create so much stress and upheaval in the organization when you're offering these? They're opportunities.
Yeah,
they
and
really
it does
are.
stress some people out when some people hear, oh, we're doing a corporate right assessment and they're going to get into my deepest, darkest secrets and all my skeletons are going to come out.
Yeah.
It creates a lot of fear in people.
It does.
But there is a benefit, and
Yes.
that's why we brought Amy in today. So today our guest is Amy Curler, who is bringing her expertise on the subject matter. Amy is a Gallup-certified StrengthsFinder coach and learning and development manager. She has been instrumental in leading StrengthsFinder in multiple organizations and is passionate about coaching individuals to figure out who they are versus who they are not and how they want to show up with others. She's been coaching personally and professionally for over 10 years and has been in a corporate setting for almost 25 years in different functions such as marketing, HR, and organizational development. Amy is currently a learning and development manager at a Milwaukee area corporation. And thank you, Amy, for joining us today.
Welcome, Amy.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity anytime I have a chance to talk about StrengthsFinder. So thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
We're very, very excited to have you. So
Yes.
How did you get started with Gallup StrengthsFinder?
Great question. I am so glad that I did. You'll hear kind of in the story that I'd like to be able to share. About 10, almost 15 years ago now, I was in a marketing role at another local corporation. And every time I came into work, I loved the brand. I loved kind of what I was doing, but I often thought to myself, if I left here tomorrow, would I be able to do marketing at another organization, marketing something else? And my answer was always a hard no, right? And so at that point, I was fortunate enough to where the organization was rolling out strengths and was able to get my results and have a one-on-one coaching call directly with a Gallup coach. And during the conversation, it was one of those aha light bulb moments where it was like, I have been in the wrong role since I've graduated from college.
Wow.
And it was so enlightening that for me, it was kind of like, okay, now I'm going to put together a game plan. Now that I have a kind of a name and a better understanding for myself and how I was made and why it always kind of felt like a square peg trying to fit into a round hole. I was trying to force something because it just kind of felt like the next step. You know, you continue to get promoted and make a little bit more money and you're like,
yes.
I'm fine.
Climbing the ladder.
Yeah, this is cool.
Running the hamster wheel, climbing the ladder.
You know?
Right.
But at the same time, while I saw my counterparts, things were, so simple for them, it seemed like, and I always struggled just a little bit. And I kept taking that on to myself going, what am I doing that I'm not getting it? Or why is this not as fun? And it was because I wasn't being my true self, to be completely honest. So that's how I started, really working with strengths. And the more that I learned, the more that I really dug into it, so that I could really start figuring out who am I not, and how do I really start being a lot more self-aware and really working towards my goal of what do these next steps look like in my career.
Mm-hmm. So when you're doing some of that coaching, what do you find are the biggest challenges with the StrengthsFinder labels? So I was talking earlier about how I got this label that I didn't resonate with, and it actually deterred me from working toward that label.
Right.
And so just curious, how do you manage that?
It's interesting. I was coaching somebody, just as of recent, and they had just received their results. And it's funny because when my clients or, in the organization, when they receive their full 34, the first thing inevitably that everybody does is they go to that second page and see what their number 34 is. And then they want to fix it right away. And
That's right.
I'm guilty of it too.
Right.
But the one thing that I would say is this individual who is seemingly already in a great position within the organization, she made a comment to me and she said, strategic is my number 32. I'm never going to get promoted because I have this so far down, and it's almost like I don't want to share this with other people. And I said, one of the things that I do when I coach is I ask permission to be able to share kind of my stories or insights from others that I've coached to be able to turn it around, because the whole thing with strengths is to be able to lead with positivity. And so, you have that specific word and people focus on that word. They don't think about, maybe I have some strategic characteristics in some of my other strengths and some of my more dominant strengths. And that's pretty much, what we talked through was just because you don't have that in your top 5, in no way, shape, or form does that mean you're not going to be promoted. Does it mean that you are not a strategic thinker? So that, that's part of the conversation, is it's kind of turning it from a negative into a positive and really shining the light on what makes them them.
Right. I love that. It also reminds me of what we share with people at Thrive, is that we're all of it.
Exactly.
And so we all have aspects of all of those strengths in the top 34. It just kind of, which ones do you gravitate to more? And
exactly.
So I want to share something quick, and this is going to be our what the crap segment. Okay. All right. So StrengthsFinders, my number 2 back in 2012 when I took it was intellection. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense because I'm not smart. So now, fast forward to 2023, and I've had a couple more jobs since then. I've had some couple, life experiences since then. I decided this past weekend to retake a short StrengthsFinder, and all of my strengths fell out of the top 5, except for intellection. It stayed solidly in number 2. So that's my what the crap. Like, how is the one? And it's just so funny. How is the one that I did not resonate with stay exactly the same?
Yeah. And another thing that I would like to add to that when you answer that, Amy, is exactly what Jen just said. So you could get a promotion, you could have a disruption in your life, a big life change. What have you noticed about results after someone has had a disruption like that, or a change, or a promotion, or they've transferred into a different department? Do you feel that they still somewhat stay the same, or are they like Jen and they all change?
Except for the one that I don't think was me.
That's a great question. One of the things that I coach people on a lot, in fact, again, it just happened as of recent, is that when you take your assessment, unless you've had a traumatic life event, your top 5 may, so for example, your number 1 may now become your number 5 or your number 6. But anything that's in your top 5, again, unless you've had a completely traumatic life event, is not going to change the trajectory of your results. It goes back to the basics of you are who you are. And, Jen had shared this story with me before this segment, and I wanted to hug her, because to me, those results just mean that she hasn't been coached appropriately, because one of the first questions after you take your assessment and you meet with a coach is, how do you feel about your results? Did anything stand out? Do you have anything where you're thinking, this just doesn't fit me? Let's talk about that. And I would have gone back to Jen and said exactly what she said, because I've obviously coached for many years, but you need time to process the information before you speak. And it's as simple as that.
And so do you find that people are confident enough to come forward? Because, for instance, if I get my results and I like them, but I'm not resonating with one, I'm not going to say, well, no, number 4 doesn't sound right because I really like that one and I don't want you. I'm afraid you're going to replace it with something else that I'm not going to like. And so do you feel that people are honest in it? Because I've talked to a lot of people who aren't honest in these. And so I'm wondering, and I'm not going to tell management as an employee that I'm not being honest, or I'm not going to challenge results if they appear to be in my favor. So do you feel when you're administering these type of assessments that for like the biggest percentage of people are being honest, or can you tell when someone's not being honest?
And the way that the Gallup assessment is, they ask the same type of question over and over again in slightly different manners. And so you'd really have to be pretty good at skirting, the system, so to speak.
Like a card counter almost.
Right. But I would say, if you're not being 100% honest, what is the purpose of that? Because when you get your results, you can't even speak to them because it's not necessarily you. And so I can tell pretty much right away if someone says, none of these resonate with me. So then my question after lots of probing is, were you fully present when you were taking the assessment? Were you honest with yourself in your answers, or were you trying to, project yourself as being something else? And so there would be a lot of questions going into that. But on the flip side, I will also say, when you do take the assessment very seriously and you take the time to go through it, and you get your results, I have seen people even, up through the executive management level, to where, again, like I shared earlier, to where there's almost, I don't know if the term embarrassment is appropriate, but there's almost a shyness of wanting to share because they don't feel that it's necessarily what the remaining C-suite results are. Like, if I don't have achiever and strategic and command in my top 5, then I don't make the cut, essentially.
Right. And so when I look at this from how can I gain the most benefit of this? So I'm one of those C-suite individuals, and I look at it and I'm afraid to share it because it's not, strategic and, innovative and all those other things. What are the next steps? How do I help develop that within the individual? Or how do what do you typically do in those situations where the individual wants to develop that side of themselves?
Right. Speaking strictly for strengths, my message to my coachees is you get what you put into it. So you get your results. Now you know what they are. And you have to, there's an exercise that Gallup uses called name it, claim it, aim it. So you name. So for me, I have restorative as my number 1. I'm a problem solver. And so now I know that side of me. I have a name to put to it. And I'm going to say, okay, that's just me. I'm not going to pretend that I have strategic as my number 1. I'm a problem solver. And I figured that out. And now I'm going to do everything that I can to learn as much about myself as I possibly can. How do I bring this to life? How can I work on it more? How can I sharpen the skill and become great at it so that I can use it as much as possible? Because when I do, I find that I can do it without even thinking about it. I'm finally in that role that I talked about earlier, like when I was in my marketing role where I felt like I really didn't fit. When I'm in that role as a restorative, I'm shining all the time and I'm engaged and I'm happy and I'm fun to be around.
And so it's interesting that you say that, because I think of it from a C-suite perspective. I'm busy. I have a lot of people under me who have also gone through this assessment that I'm trying to encourage and kind of stoke that inspiration
Right.
within them to pursue it and make those changes. How do I find the time to do that? How do I find the time to really get into what we at Thrive called essential skills? It sounds like when I'm trying to develop some of these things within me, I need those essential skills.
Right.
And so how can I help develop that in my people and myself when I'm already burning the candle at both ends?
Oh, I know.
Okay.
I know. Have everyone in the organization print their top 5s on a piece of paper and hang it on the outside of their cubicle right next to their name tag.
Oh yeah, that's what you guys did.
So this was an experience. And I believe it came from a good place. I believe it came from a place to help people start to connect and know how to work together. However, I saw it work more as a crutch.
Yeah.
So I'd walk up to Lori's cube, and her number 1 is a woo. And I'm like, well, I can't think of another one, but I'm definitely not a woo. So there is no way, 1, do I want her on my team for this project? And 2, I can't work with her. Are you kidding me? She's going to be
woo.
like, woo, all over the place. And
that would be me.
That would be you, which is great because I love that. I love working with woos. But as Lori was asking about the C-suite and how to help them know their people, that I don't believe was the solution, because it became such a crutch for everyone. So how do you coach employees to not use StrengthsFinders as a crutch?
Yeah.
I have a couple different ways to answer that, because the first question that I heard was pointed towards leadership. And so if I could answer that one first,
yes,
I would say, as we start seeing this more and more in organizations, and now having gone through this multiple times, when you look at your leader, especially those in the C-suite, and particularly, let's say, with the CEO, the remainder, of the workforce is looking to the leader to be able to say, show me that this is okay, that we can really start diving into what does this mean? Show me that I can take the time to invest in myself so that I can bring my best self to the organization, right? But then also show me the human side of you. Show me how you've gone through your coaching, and show me that you are vulnerable enough to share your results with me and your journey with me, and help me understand your struggles so that we can have this common language and really hit home the, there are no barriers. Let's talk through a weakness. We all have them. You know what I mean? Let's take those labels out of there, because we can't all be achieving strategic command people. You're going to need me, the woo on your team, to make everybody happy.
You're going to need the connectedness person as well.
Yes.
That just came up with my number 1 this past weekend.
Yes.
Right. So what I hear you saying, Amy, is not only do you have to prepare your leadership for this is going to take time. And so one of the things we always say is intentional growth
requires deliberate practice.
Yeah. So as part of this assessment, there is going to be an amount of time that has to be dedicated to this so that we can practice it and get better at it and develop it. And bringing in those essential skills and saying there is going to be a level of vulnerability, a level of self-awareness, a level of there are going to be these other things that we're going to have to start looking at and being more open about, and having those conversations about that we may not have done in the past.
Right. Exactly.
And reflecting back on my first experience in an organization with StrengthsFinders, I think that it started at the bottom and then was trying to go to the top, if I remember correctly. And maybe that's where some of the disconnect was. That there wasn't that awareness and support throughout the organization. And, large organizations have to do this in what they feel is a strategic way. Right. Again, it was a decade ago, and all I can remember is intellection. So, and then you were going to touch a little bit on the crutch with employees.
Yes. So I'll use myself as an example, again, if I may. So when we talk about crutches, I learned very quickly about myself once I knew this before I received the results of my assessment, but once I got the assessment, it was like ding, 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 right there. I keep it up on my wall so that I kind of filter my my next move through through this piece of paper, and that is for me anything analytical, dealing directly with numbers. So I can, do my department's budget. Fine. I hate working on it. I will need somebody to double check the numbers because I am just not a numbers person. I'm not going to tell my boss, I don't do numbers, I'm not doing the budget. Even though I know that it'll take me probably double the time that it would take my husband, who's a CPA, to do the budget, it's still something that I need to do because it's part of my everyday role, right? So I can't use that as a crutch. It is
Well, and it's growing
self-awareness.
you too. Yeah, it'll grow you each time that you work on
Exactly.
that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'll never enjoy
But-
it. I'll never get to the point of enjoyment, but it is something that you just have to do.
So what about those people who aren't emotionally intelligent? What about those people who don't like diving into that aspect? They stay away from it. Anything that resembles them looking inward, they're like, no, thank you, don't want to do it. How do you address those people in an assessment?
Great question. I think, those are the people that I enjoy coaching the most because once they have their own aha moment, it helps them better understand themselves. If you're talking specifically about emotional intelligence, one of the things that I do coach a lot about, and I it almost sound like a broken record, is how do you show up? Right? So you may not be a woo or a relator or an overall relationship builder. You may be a complete introvert, but how you show up with others and how you interact with others speaks a lot about you. So that is something that I definitely coach on, and it takes it, one step above, StrengthsFinder, but there's still that emotional aspect to where, again, I don't like working on numbers at work, but I have to do it. And so from an EI perspective, you still have to be able to show up and interact with others on a positive level, if that answers your question.
I love that, and that you spend time on that. And we talk about that a lot too. And not only from the place of, well, we especially highlight how do you show up energetically and
Right.
your intentionality with your interactions.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. The intentionality, 100%.
Cool. Yeah. Awesome.
So should we move on to the section 3? We're going to talk a little bit about the...
Well, I have one more question.
You do? Okay,
Amy.
great.
So if you could change, tweak, improve something about StrengthsFinders, what would it be? If there's something you're like, if I could just change this, or just, that one little enhancement, what would it be for you?
Every once in a while when I go through and I'm coaching somebody and I need to brush up on, some of the smaller minute details of a certain theme, I'll read the label that goes with it, and there's still just a little hint of it may be perceived as negative. And so one of the biggest things that I would stress is that words are important. And so if somebody sees something, so I'll use one of the words that a lot of my coaches get hung up on is one of the themes is called significance. And one of the tags in significance, it says you want to look important in the eyes of others. Well, I don't know one human being that wants to be like, that is so me. And so I've consistently touched on that when I've had the opportunity to go to Omaha and sit through some of the Gallup summits of how do we turn that into more of a positive intent, because strengths is all about leading with positive intent and talking about how you're showing up. And so there's so much positivity, but every once in a while there's tinge of what can be perceived as negativity, to where people don't want to claim that they have that particular strength.
Yeah. And I like that you bring up language, because I know even in our organization early on, people would bring up disruption, disrupting the way, corporate America does business. And when I first heard disruption, to me, it carried a negative connotation. I'm like, oh, I don't want to use that. Disruption's a bad thing. And so when we're taking these assessments, we always bring up individualizing things, whether it's goals or coaching sessions, regardless of what it is, being individualized is very important. And like you said, with language especially, because one word that has a positive connotation to one person could have a negative one for another. One word that may motivate one individual, like in Jen's case, it demotivated her.
Exactly.
And so I need to know the individual well enough to know which words resonate with them and are going to be those positive words that are going to have the benefit.
Yeah. Like my number 5 was empathy. I'm like, yes, all in on empathy. So much so that I didn't know how to set boundaries. And I was a sponge. I would take on whatever other people were dishing out as their energy, as their emotions, is it my fault? Is everything happening right now my fault? And it's funny. Empathy has now fallen off my top 5. And not that I'm not still empathetic, but I do believe I've developed the skills to put those boundaries into place so I can have self-awareness and self-care first, and then go out into the organization, into the community, into the group.
Yeah, which is a good point. So Amy, how do you balance that? So when someone gets their results and they go in an extreme direction with them, because we teach a lot at Thrive about the over and underuse of things and how they're both have their detriments. What do you do? Do you find people do that quite often?
There's a term that they use within StrengthsFinder, and I know that it's a little outdated right now, but we used to refer to it as balconies and basements. And essentially what it means is that every theme or every strength has, when you're using it at its best, which is when you're on your balcony, or when you're in your basement, when you're allowing it to kind of get in your way. And so again, I think at the end of the day, it all comes back to that being aware piece. And so once you've really honed in on who you are and what your strengths are, you become so self-aware. And you almost have that inner voice of, Jen, you mentioned empathy. I have empathy in my top 5. If I'm in the middle of a conversation and I can feel myself getting a little choked up, I need to be able to kind of put that shield up and name and be self-aware of what's happening to me, before I take it to that next level and have a complete breakdown in the middle of work,
Right.
So it centers always back to self-awareness and how you show up.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
And one of the things we always talk about is, so you say self-awareness, and that's great, but there are self-aware people who conceptualize it, and then there are self-aware people who know how to practically apply it. And so I can't tell you how many times I've had conversations with people and they're trekking with you. They get it.
Yeah.
But only at a conceptual level. And so you're using different parts of the brain to actually conceptualize it versus practically apply it. And so what do you get those people who are conceptualizing it versus practically applying it?
That is a good question. Can you tell me a few more examples?
Well, for instance, I was giving a series of workshops to a group of individuals. And a lot of them sat through the workshops. There were some, you can tell those people who get it. So,
and you're kind of writing it down.
You're talking information, they have those aha moments. You can see the expression in their face where you're like, okay, they've got it. They're never going to be the same again. They're going to operate differently from this point on. And then you get the people who are kind of processing it and they're like, yeah, I get it. And they can reiterate it and regurgitate it until the cows come home, but they don't apply it.
We call it like letting it drop in.
Yeah.
So like
there-
conceptualizing, let it drop into your being, and then practicing it so it becomes part of your muscle memory.
So they leave the session and they go do something completely opposite, and you're like, wait a minute, you just said you
just-
understood it.
I don't get
You know how to apply it, but then you go out and you don't apply it. You don't live it. You're not integrating it into who you are and how you're being.
Yes.
It almost sounds a little bit of the question that we talked a little bit about, like, how do you show up? And it was so great that Amy, you shared how you show up, but then how do you, ask people to really show up and practice their strengths? Is that
to integrate it into who they're being when they're showing up, and not just, you have people who they placate you. So, you say the things you're supposed to say because you're supposed to say them to this individual
boss.
But there's nothing behind it. There's nothing to substantiate that. And so when I'm talking about practical application, it's like, it's within you. And we talk about human internal operating system. Now my DNA, now my cellular structure, now my neural pathways have changed because I'm operating from this place, and I'm not just lip service.
Right. I would agree. I'll tell you, where I see it within organizations and within, people that I've coached on a personal level. Once they're aware of who they are, a lot of times what I've seen is, so if I'm coaching somebody that has Maximizer, for example, one of the downsides or one of the weaknesses, or when you're in your basement with Maximizer, is that you may become overly critical of others, and whether that be of their work, if they're writing a presentation and they want to be able to see something just the way that they want to be able to see it. They know at this point, based on coaching sessions, that they have this, and that, they say that they're self-aware. I kind of smirk at it, because now that they're self-aware, they're almost at a point where they feel comfortable telling others, I'm very self-aware that I'm critical, but just so you know, I have Maximizer. So my intention is to not seem overly critical, but you need to change A, B, and C in order for this to be complete. I'm self-aware that I'm being critical right now, but I also get a free pass.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that necessarily answers your question, but that's essentially how I see it playing out in strengths. As far as I have coached people, and they really get it, but they still kind of use it as far as, as a weakness. It's a weakness for them because they're allowing it to get in the way.
Yeah. And I think that's where higher levels of training are beneficial, because you do get those people. And with and I've been doing business risk consulting. I've been dealing in the business community and with individuals for close to 30 years. And what I do find is those who say they're most enlightened, those who say they're most open and most aware, they say they are, but when you get down to it, they're not the most open. They're not the most, willing to take on new concepts and ideas. And so that's what I was getting at by conceptualization versus practical application.
Well, and I also hear you saying that is one way that organizations can optimize the use of assessments and mitigate some of the pitfalls that we talked about in like the first segment. So now bringing us around to segment 3, what can be done? What have you seen organizations do to get the most impact out of assessments and to optimize the assessments? They put a lot of manpower into it. They put a lot of financial support into it. How can they best get
optimize those results? Yeah. How can they get the most out of it?
Because to be honest, right after I took StrengthsFinders, like a year later, the organization was having us do MBTI, Myers-Briggs.
Okay.
So it just kind of felt like a drop. So what is your take on that, on optimizing?
Sure. I mentioned it earlier, but one of the things that I find extremely important is, top down and tone from the top. So if an organization is going to roll this out, it has to start with leadership, because it is a commitment to the organization and it's a commitment to their employees. as far as ensuring engagement and, again, allowing employees that additional time to really invest in themselves, which will in turn then, just benefit the organization overall. So again, starting top down, referring back to being able to have those vulnerable conversations with others. But then it's really in the learning and development space. I believe that, in L&D, we are instrumental in rolling it out in the organization as far as here are the things that you can do. And we've really laid it out. And I say we because I've been in L&D in multiple organizations and essentially have seen it from a couple of different angles. But you start with the individual. So you learn about yourself first, and then you learn how to, roll it out within teams and figure out, what it means to work in a team setting. And you just continue to go from there. And so you start small and you continue to build on the curriculum.
Well, and I kind of see it like converging. So you have people working on their own self-awareness and their own personal development. At the same time, you have the leadership working in that way too. And that was sort of our hypothesis and our thoughts on how to optimize. And it starts with that personal development. So do you have a suggestion, Lori, for people who are watching, how they could start with that personal development piece?
Well, and I have some information on that, but I just want to jump back to, I think this is so critical because so often when management does bring in assessments, it's always from the standpoint of, I want to know more about you. I want to have a better understanding of you. And it's like, how can you do that when you don't understand yourself?
Yeah.
And so I love that Amy brought in, it's first understanding you. And that is the key to any of this. You have to be at a certain level of awareness. You have to be at a certain level of emotional intelligence before any of this can even, before you can take it in and even try it on and start discerning. And so some of the things I came up with, just to recap what we've talked about today, is just, being able to discern the results. Do you have the capacity to practically apply what the results are? Do you have the confidence to challenge it if it's not something, or to have those difficult conversations around what you don't feel, is highlighting you the best? Do you know how to take personal responsibility in it? Do you know how to manage?
I did not take personal responsibility when I didn't resonate with
100%. We're not able to do our jobs as coaches if we don't get pushback. We love the pushback. Help me understand how this
challenge.
Yes.
Yeah. It's maintaining your energy in it, continuing to show up and perform your best and be your best after you've gotten the results. Just navigating challenging people and conversations. It's that solid communication piece. I mean, all of these, I think, are instrumental, and from what I hear you saying, in building the foundation before you go into these assessments. And then the nurturing side.
You do such a great job of taking all of my rambling and putting it in a better package.
They're not rambling.
It's what I hear you saying. And then on the other end of it, once you do have the results, it's a similar process, taking the personal responsibility, speaking up about those things that may or may not resonate with you, and taking the personal responsibility to say, hey, this is how I want to move forward in this, and this is what it looks like for me.
Yes, building that foundation is key, because you can't interact with others and build teams if you don't understand yourself first and foremost.
Yeah.
Well, Amy, we want to thank you so much for joining us today. And if you want to let viewers know how they could reach out to you if they'd like some more information on how to develop some of their StrengthsFinders, or any other tips that you have, where can they reach you?
I can be reached via email. My email is amy.curler, CURLER 220@gmail.com. I do coach on the side, and so I'm happy to coach anybody that wants to send me an email. I love all things strengths, and so I'm happy to jump in and help.
That's awesome. Thank you. We will include your information in the description and in the video as we get it out there even a little more than today's live stream. And so we want to thank you. Have a great one.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
So, Lori, what are you taking away
Oh, so much.
overall? I know there's so much that but what stands out to you the most that you would like to reiterate for everyone as they're watching today?
Well, and I kind of recapped everything, but
Yeah.
one of the things, and I know you brought your Thrive book,
Oh,
was just a lot of the foundational stuff we teach at Thrive. And so getting into those essential skills.
these are some of my professional development things, but then this
our Thrive book,
was
getting
my Thrive
into
book.
emotional aptitude, communication,
confidence,
a lot of the things, discernment,
emotional aptitude.
all of the things that help you build the solid foundation before you go into an environment of assessments.
And I'm just going to add that my reflection that I did leading up to this this show today, I saw everything in such a great light after having gone through certification for coaching, but just even getting to know myself, because as I mentioned in the beginning, I can see others so clearly, but it was difficult for me to see myself. So now that I can go, and I took the StrengthsFinders again this weekend from my Inner Truth, which we talk about in HIOS. And I took MBTI again, like the 16 personality test with it. And it felt so much easier. It didn't feel like a chore. And I can resonate with the results that I got. And it's not going to dictate who I am. It's going to inform how I show up in the world.
Nice.
Yes.
Good. Cool.
So
this was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
I was going to say, we didn't do a book segment, but I mean, there are so many books out there by so many people.
And one thing I want to say, there's so many books out there that assess you.
Yes.
But there aren't a lot of books that discuss the foundational piece and discuss the continuation piece.
True.
So I was really happy that we could bring that insight to you guys today.
Yeah, and as we disseminate the show a little more and do some of our clips post-show, I am going to share a testimonial from a past Thrive client who does a lot of these assessments in the workplace for herself, and just the difference it's made for her after going through some of the Thrive coaching and classes that we offer, now going into work and organizations and taking these assessments, and how she sees it all through a completely different lens.
Oh, cool. That's awesome. Well, we want to thank John, our production expert in Studio A5 here at Expansive Workplace in Wauwatosa. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you, Lori. And thank you, Amy.
And to our viewers, we appreciate you tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.
Bye.